Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be doing the more negative side of my end of the year content, and that is going to be the books in 2024 that I enjoyed the least. I may have used worst books of 2024 in the thumbnail, but I will say right off the bat that I don't think any of these are necessarily objectively bad. I just didn't enjoy them for one reason or another. So I will put that caveat in there. I am glad, at least, that I don't have any that I would consider objectively bad. I read a total of 103 books in 2024, and I have 14 that I've pulled out to talk to you about today, and I've split them into DNFs, disappointments, and outright dislikes. I also will have timestamps for each of the books because I know it can be difficult to hear someone else talk negatively about a book you really enjoyed. So if you don't want to hear my salty opinions on the books that I'm going to mention, feel free to browse the timestamps and skip around as you please. I know some people don't like the sort of inherent negativity of this type of video, but I actually really enjoy watching them and I enjoy making them. Partly because it's fun to be salty about things you didn't have a great time with, especially if you feel like you're the only one. But also because I think it's really good for us to reflect on what didn't work in the previous year so we can maybe learn those lessons going forward. And I'll be pointing those out both so you guys see them and so I can remind myself what I need to avoid in 2025. As a final note, before I get to the books themselves, I have to give the caveat that again, some of these books are super well loved and super hyped, so just because I hate it and have negative things to say about it does not say anything about you if you enjoyed them. Please don't feel like I'm attacking you personally. That is not my intent with this video at all. But feel free to tell me in the comments if I have hurt you by my salty opinions. Just please keep it kind. Okay, so I will move into the DNFs. I have 4 of these to talk about, and I have them in roughly chronological order. I don't know if it's exact, but that's just how I had it on my list. The first one is the Bone Chips, which is the first book in R.J. Barker's Tide Child series. I had really, really high hopes for this because I got the Broken Binding special editions that they put out, which were gorgeous. Some of the most beautiful dragon books I think I've ever seen. So I really wanted to like it, but unfortunately I just didn't mesh with the writing style at all. It's very dense, throw you in the middle of things writing style, which I can sometimes deal with well, but in this case, the main character that you're following is kind of a loser and a drunk and doesn't really have the respect of his crew. He's crewing a pirate ship that's built out of dragon bones, and there's a whole lot of political intrigue. What I found really frustrating is that there was really nothing about the main character that I cared about, and I know if I had kept reading, there likely would have been a character arc where he comes into his own, but I just wasn't patient enough to see it. Nothing about the way the world building was being introduced was really holding my attention, so this just really wasn't for me. I can understand why other people like it. I think if you're really into in-depth world building and seeing someone come from like the depths of despair up to something else, which I presume is what's going to happen here, you might check it out. I only made it 19% into this one. The next one I'm going to talk about is a well-loved Gothic horror classic, so I know I may hurt some people with this one. That's Rebecca by Daphne DuMaurier. I only made it 10% into this one. It was just an immediate mismatch for me. I tend to not like classics in general. There's a sort of distance from the characters and slowness in pacing that frequently doesn't work for me, and that was definitely the case with Rebecca. I picked this up as part of the Phantom of the Opera readathon, where we were reading a lot of Gothic horror and Gothic romance. I often find with classics that audiobooks work better for me, so I was hoping that would kind of get me over my usual issues with it. But that didn't work in this one, and part of the problem, along with it just being that classic style, is also that the main character, who is a lady's maid who essentially gets swept off her feet and married to this widower who takes her back to his creepy mansion, and stuff occurs from there. But she's so naive and sheltered, and the relationship between her and the widower feels very paternalistic in a way that I just don't like. You do sometimes see that in classics, but it does not appeal to me on really any level. And I really don't like super naive characters that are just kind of bumbling around. And that's very much what this was. So this is just not a classic I'm interested in picking up again. I could see watching an adaptation of it or reading someone's more modern take on it. So I think I will be picking up The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas, because I've heard that one is sort of a response to Rebecca, and I feel like I might enjoy it more, but we'll see. The next DNF that I'm going to talk about is I Am AI by Jiang. I might have mispronounced that, so apologies if I did. This is a novelette that I ended up picking up for the Hugo Awards. It was nominated, and I wanted to make sure I read all the nominations. You'll see another one of those later on in this list, unfortunately. And I really enjoyed, again, I'm bad with pronunciations, Ling Hun by this author was really good, which was sort of a collection of short stories, and I think there was a novella in there too that was really good. This one is just too on the nose in the themes for me. It follows a cyborg who is pretending to be an AI, who is responding to people's writing prompts and struggling to make ends meet. And it just felt very much like a writer responding to the frustration and the threat of people using AI more. And it was just too on the nose for my particular preferences. I really don't like super thematically driven fiction. I don't mind if themes are woven in, but I need to care about the characters and what's happening. And there's just not really the space to do that in this type of story. So it just wasn't working for me. I think if you are really interested in AI and do like more on the nose themes, I think you should try picking this one up, because I think it's well written. It just isn't my preference. The story is only 80 pages long. I made it 40 pages, and I knew if I kept going, I would give it a 1 star, and it didn't really feel like it was 1-star material. I just wasn't enjoying it, so I gave up. The final DNF I'm going to talk about is a book that I picked up because it was selected as a book club pick for my local bookstore, which I had been wanting to start attending, and I didn't like it, and I didn't want it to show up to the book club hating the first time I ever showed up. So I ended up just giving up on this one. It is The Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackwith. And I think if you are a reader who really loves books that play around with that love of books and love of libraries, this might work better for you. I find that I don't like that as much as, even though I have worked in libraries and obviously grew up loving books, when it gets really into having fantasy versions of things that exist in the world, the one that really set me off was like their version of interlibrary loans. It just feels so twee to me, like just cutesy and like, teehee, look at what I've put into this fantasy world, and I just hate it so much. I think if I had cared about the characters in this, I might have been able to overlook it, but it just felt like a less entertaining version of Good Omens to me, and I just didn't care. So this is very much not for me. I think if you like sort of meta, slightly humorous stories that involve like books and libraries, and in this case the main character is a librarian from hell who's tracking down an escaped character from a story, then you should try this one out. I don't think it's terribly written. I just think it's absolutely not for me. I only made it 10% into that one, so I didn't give it too much of a chance, but I feel comfortable not picking it back up. Okay, moving into disappointments, I think all 3 of the ones that I have to talk about are fairly popular books that just didn't work for me. I think most of these I gave 2 or 3 stars. So again, not my most hated books of the year, just ones that I was particularly frustrated by. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is a blend of Gothic horror set in 1950s Mexico, where the main character is a socialite who her cousin has recently married into this strange, reclusive English family in the countryside and has sent back some worrying letters to her family. So Noemi is sent out to find out what's going on with her cousin and if she's really in danger. And this has a lot of rave reviews, and I understand why other people are really into it, and the cover is absolutely gorgeous. I've actually tried to read this multiple times before and kept thinking if I just picked it up at a different time, it would work better for me. And unfortunately, I just don't think I jive with the writing in this at all. The perspective is very withdrawn and distant in a sort of classic style. Again, you'll see a repeat of that. The main character is it's fun to see sort of like a very outgoing, party-focused character kind of stuck in this situation. But I never felt fully connected to her as a character. There was something that always felt like distant about it. And it was so slow in its pacing. Intentionally, so I don't think that that's poorly done on the author's part. I just think I don't enjoy it. And the final nail in the coffin for me with this one is that there's a particular element of body horror that this one has that I won't get into for spoiler reasons, but it's an immediate ick for me. It makes me stop enjoying the story because I just don't want to read about that. And that definitely hurt this book, the enjoyment of this book for me, because that happens when the events in the story are really starting to ramp up, and it just kind of ruined the fact that we were moving into more exciting pacing, but it has this thing I hate. So just not a win for me, really. I think if you like Gothic horror and you don't mind a more distant perspective, this could work better for you, but it's a no for me. And I'm going to give Silvia Moreno-Garcia at least one more shot before I consider her style not for me. But from some comments I've seen, I feel like this might just not be a match for me on an author level. So I know this next book is going to hurt some friends of mine because they all loved it. Gave it 5 stars, new favorite. And I really didn't enjoy this basically from the beginning of the story. I ended up switching to audiobook just to see if that would make a difference, and unfortunately no. And that is Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. Again, not one that I think is poorly written. It just has some pet peeves for me. The story follows Shisheshin, who is a monster who wakes up from hibernation, and she's sort of, I always imagined her as sort of like a blob or gelatinous cube where she can consume things and then use elements of whatever she consumes to form a body for herself. And so she ends up, in the course of escaping from these hunters, falls in love with the sister of the hunters, who is more gentle than the rest of them. And it's referred to as horror fantasy, like horror, romance, and fantasy. And I think that's accurate. What doesn't work for me in this one is that Shisheshin does a lot of fourth wall breaking and talking directly to the reader, and I generally like that. However, there's a ton of commentary on how hypocritical humans are and how maybe they're the real monsters, and I usually like that theme, but not when it's commented on the level it is in this book. It is constant. I started counting, and at this point I don't remember how many times, but multiple times a chapter. And these chapters are not super long, so I got really frustrated by that. And then the villains in this story are very mustache-twirling, Joffrey level evil to be evil. And I just don't find that interesting. I want a nuanced villain, or I want to feel like there's something other than like strict good and evil. What I will say in this book's favor is it handles trauma really well. The love interest in the story has a lot of toxic relationships in her life. And when she and Shisheshin start exploring that romance, it's not like the trauma instantly disappears once they fall in love. There's a lot that they have to work through and figure out together. And I thought that was explored in a really healthy and sympathetic way. So I really appreciated that element. It just wasn't enough to make me enjoy the story with the other issues that I had. So I think this is going to be more successful with readers who don't have my particular pet peeves. And so if that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely pick it up. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars, but my feelings about it are maybe more like 1.5, 2 stars. The final disappointment that I want to talk about in this video is from an author that I actually have read a lot of her books this year, and this was the first one that I picked up, and it almost kept me from continuing with her books, and I'm really glad I didn't stop, because I've loved all of her other books. It's just this one in particular doesn't work for me. And that book is the Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton. So what you need to know going into this book is that it is historical, Victorian era adventure, super over the top, super kind of goofy. The main character is part of a society of lady pirates who all fly around in their houses and fight each other and constantly steal things. It's very madcap. And the main character, Cecilia, ends up teaming up with this assassin who's been sent to kill her in order to foil the plots of this larger villain that in fact has hired the assassin. I think my problems with this book are sort of twofold. The first is that I don't like the dynamic between the main character Cecilia and the male main character, Ned Lightbourne. Cecilia is extremely naive and sheltered, and Ned is the very experienced rogue, which is a combo that you often see in historical romance, which I tend to read a lot of, and typically really enjoy. I find that as I'm getting older, I enjoy that dynamic less and less. What it tends to lead to is a lack of agency on the female main character's part, unless it's done in a very specific way, and I definitely felt like that about Cecilia. She's constantly, either at the beginning of the book, she's completely being guided by the older women in her society who are telling her what she needs to do. And then the second half of the book, it's Ned, the male main character, who's telling her, guiding her on what she needs to do. And it's really not till the very end that she starts making her own choices. And well, that's really the point of this book, is Cecilia finding her way to being able to be her own person. I don't enjoy stories where there's a lack of agency like that. So that really frustrated me. I also think that in a weird way, this isn't over the top enough for me. It's quite silly, but then when I read some of Holton's other books, like The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love, that was even more over the top, and I enjoyed it way more. So I feel like this didn't go as far as it needed to for me to really enjoy it, and then I didn't enjoy the character dynamic. So I had high hopes for this because I do enjoy historical romance and silly adventure. It just wasn't a fit for me. Okay, so now we are moving into the 7 books that I would consider outright dislikes or complete mismatches for me. And I have these roughly in order from the least disliked to the most disliked. So the one that I could see the most promise in and understand the perspective on is an arc that I ended up picking up because it was rumored as a book box pick and I wanted to see if I actually liked it, even though some of the tropes mentioned in the synopsis were anti-buzzwords for me, things would immediately turn me off. And unfortunately, my intuition was spot on for this one. This is The Last Hour Between Worlds by Melissa Caruso. And the plotline for this essentially follows a fantasy world sort of detective inspector type character who has recently had a child and is coming out of her maternity leave in order to attend this sort of lavish party once she's there, she ends up figuring out that everybody there is stuck in a time loop and has to team up with a rival who's a thief, in order to get to the bottom of this time loop. As someone who typically really doesn't enjoy anything messing around with time or multiple dimensions, this was a real struggle for me. And I knew it would be going in. The time loops, like they almost always do, felt super repetitive. There's a set number, I don't want to get into spoilers for this, but there's a set number of time loops that they can go through as part of this story, and instead of skimming over some of them, you get every single possible loop of the same scene, and it just felt so repetitive and so boring to me. I just immediately got frustrated by that particular trope. And then the main character was not appealing to me at all. So, going in, she's a new mom, and I don't have a problem with that as part of a character's history, and I like seeing more moms in fantasy in general, but this was just constant references to her new baby and how she couldn't bear to be away from her and how nobody understood what she was going through with it. And I think if you identify with that, if you are a new parent and that is kind of your world, I could see enjoying this. But as someone who's in my late 30s, doesn't have kids and doesn't plan to have kids, this is just not interesting as a character trait to me. Adding to that, the other character traits for the main character, Kimbrel, is workaholic and saves kids and puppies. And it's like, that's not a person. No part of that feels like someone that I would meet on the street and care about. So I really couldn't get attached to her at all. The world building sort of throws you in the middle and expects you to figure it out, which is fine in some cases. In this particular case, the beginning was pure confusion. And then as you start to understand what's happening in this world and in this time loop they're stuck in, it just feels very surface level. Like if you think about the implications of what's happening, it makes no sense that it wouldn't be impacting the world in some way. So it just ended up frustrating me the more I learned about it. So this basically didn't work for me on any level. I didn't enjoy the plotting, I didn't enjoy the characters, and the world building was unsatisfying. So it was just an immediate no for me, and an indication that I need to trust my intuition more often when I see some of these book box picks and not get FOMO when it's something I know I won't like. Then I picked up another classic. I should know better, but in this case, it was The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. I picked this up as part of the Phantom of the Opera readathon because I knew there would be a lot of story content as part of the readathon, and I'd only ever seen the movie, so I wanted to get that greater depth of the actual story. And this is just a classic that doesn't work for me for all the same reasons Rebecca didn't work for me. So I don't want to reiterate those, but there's just nothing interesting in this story. The main character is that type of female character I've seen more often in classics where the expectation is that the woman will sacrifice everything and she's being helped by various men who turn out to be completely useless. And it's basically all on her, and I just really hate that dynamic. I know this is written in a time period where that's more acceptable, but I don't enjoy reading it. So this was a total miss for me. The one positive I can say about picking up Phantom of the Opera is immediately after I read it, I picked up Masquerade by Terry Pratchett and reread it. And having just read the classic, so many more of Pratchett's jokes hit that I hadn't even realized were specific jokes about Phantom of the Opera and opera in general, and just really increased my enjoyment of that book. So I don't necessarily regret having read it, but I wouldn't reread it. As I mentioned earlier when I was talking about I Am AI, this is the other Hugo nomination that super didn't work for me, and that is The Crane Husband by Kelly Barnhill. Yet another one that I knew from the synopsis would probably not be a win for me, and that was because it is very heavily magical realism fairy tale retelling. The fairy tale retelling I do tend to like, but magical realism rarely works for me. And this is very much sort of literary speculative fiction where the main character is her father has died when she was younger. Her mom has recently brought home a new boyfriend who is a crane, like a literal crane. And it's really exploring the cycles of domestic abuse and the way that impacts the whole family as this girl is kind of trying to keep everything together and having to be the adult in the family. And I just don't love on the nose themes, as we've talked about. I don't love the magical realism element where it's like, is he a crane? Is this something that she's just seeing him as a crane? Who knows? I just don't like that. So I think the prose is well written. So I think if you like this sort of story, you should check it out. If you don't, I would stay away from this novella. The next book I have to talk about, yet another classic. Lesson learned, stay away from most classics. I don't want to completely knock them out of my reading, but I need to know going in that it's probably not going to be a win for me. This time I picked up Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. So this is the only book that I picked up as part of the Bookish Drummers Ray Bradbury book club, and I do feel bad about that because I thought I would really enjoy this because I didn't look too closely into it. All I knew was that it was sort of fall themed and had like a creepy carnival in it. And the premise for this is basically this creepy carnival comes to this very sleepy small town, and two young boys who are growing up there end up having to deal with it and all of the weird things this carnival is doing. And it sort of has vibes of It, but without getting into some of the character depth that made it work really well for me. It also has a very lyrical writing style that felt like very purple prose to me. I just really am a hard sell on any kind of lyrical writing style. And combining that with the fact that this is really, there's a lot of commentary from Bradbury on growing up and relationships between men and women that I don't find interesting or enjoy reading at all. There's some commentary in here about how women are basically only good for gossip and making babies, and I just, like, I know the time this is written in, but so frustrating to read. It just kind of, I wasn't enjoying it already, and that really downgraded it for me. So I didn't really enjoy any part of this. The narration for the Audible exclusive version I read was pretty good. I think if you like lyrical writing styles and you don't mind some of the dated commentary, then you might really enjoy it. Just not for me. I'm just getting all the classics out of the way, I guess, because the next one I have to talk about is The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath by H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft is an experience anyway, because it's early 1900s horror. There's going to be a lot of stuff modern readers aren't going to enjoy. Plenty of racism, plenty of classism type stuff. And so I go in expecting that from Lovecraft. And this isn't one of his worst stories in terms of that element, but I think it is one of the ones where it's most obvious how much he loves England and Northeast US. And it's also one of his most meandering. I only picked this one up because I had the novella The Dream Quest of Velvet Bow, and I heard this was basically a direct commentary to this H.P. Lovecraft story. So I wanted to read the original before I read the commentary. And I'm glad I did, because I think that novella hit a lot harder than it would have if I hadn't already had the Lovecraft to compare it to. But this is really just a dreamer exploring this dream world where he's been denied access to this mythical city because of some fickle gods, and it's just him trying to get back to that city. It's very dream sequency, very repetitive in terms of getting kidnapped by creepy figures in this dream world and then having to rescue himself or be rescued, and just not my jam. No part of this I enjoyed. There are Lovecraft stories I really enjoy, but this is not one of them. I tend to read a fair amount of graphic novels, and for whatever reason, in 2024, I actually didn't end up reading a lot of them. But the one I'm going to talk about next is a graphic novel that is probably one of the least successful for me, and that is Descender Volume 1 by Jeff Lemire. And this one just felt like such generic sci-fi to me. The plot follows a young android boy and wakes up after things have gone very bad between androids and humans. And there's a lot of techno jargon, there's a ton of exposition dumps, which is a major pet peeve for me with graphic novels. You have a visual medium, why are you just dumping walls of text? And it just really, not the kind of sci-fi graphic novel I want to read, and not one I could ever really recommend because I don't think it's doing anything interesting. There are people who really enjoy it, I'm just not one of them. I'm being a bit too long-winded in this because my camera battery died, so apologies if the setup is slightly different. I tried to more or less get there. But I will finally get to the last book on my worst of list. And I will say that even though this one's really hyped, and I've seen a lot of 4 and 5-star reviews for it, I don't get it. For me, this was just, I don't think the writing is good. I don't think the plotting is good. I don't think the romance is good, but there are a lot of people who disagree with me, so take this review with a grain of salt. All that to say, my most disliked book of 2024 is Thrum by Meg Smitherman. This is a pretty short, I think it's a novella length, basically, and was billed to me as sci-fi, gothic horror with some romance in it, and I don't know that I agree. It really feels like a sci-fi thriller to me, and I can't get into the reasons that I would make that argument without being spoilery, so I won't get into that. I'll just say that the premise follows a woman who wakes up on her spaceship alone, nobody else is left, and her ship is completely disabled. And she manages to get the attention of a ship that's in the same isolated area she's in, and they take her onto their ship, and a whole bunch of creepy stuff happens. And man, I didn't like this at all. The prose is it's very lyrical. I found it incredibly purple prosy. I also found the main character to be deeply unlikable in that sort of whiny, woe is me way that I tend to see more often in thrillers. That I guess that tells you how I feel about most thrillers as well. But I just found her super obnoxious and didn't really care about what was happening to her because I didn't find her interesting. The final nail in the coffin for me with this one is that it utilizes a trope that I like when it's done well, but I think it's very easy to do it poorly, and I think this book does it poorly. If you're curious about it, it is a major spoiler. So if you're curious about it, let me know in the comments, and I'll explain what I don't like about it. But I don't want to put anything in here that's spoilery, so I won't get into it. But this is just a miss for me on literally every level, and I probably wouldn't pick up anything else by this author. I do feel slightly guilty saying that because it is indie, and I generally try not to crap on indie books, but I also have to be honest, and I really didn't enjoy my experience with this one. So those are all of the books that I didn't get along with this year. I think I, honestly, reflecting on it, definitely have things I need to change in my 2025 reading, being more selective when I pick up classics, not picking up books just because I have FOMO, even though I know there's things in the synopsis that I won't like. And I don't want to completely rule those out because I think it is good to push your boundaries because you never know when something's going to work. There is, in fact, going to be a book in my best of list that, on the face of it, I would have said there's no way I'm going to enjoy that. So you never know. But I think it's also good to go in with better expectations so you're not unreasonably critical if you're disappointed by something not living up to that. Let me know what your worst books of the year have been. If there's any lessons that you're taking away from the books you didn't enjoy this year, because I think that's my favorite way going forward to handle these is really as what did we learn from this? Later this week, I will be having the more positive side of my end of year content. So on Wednesday evening at 5 p.m. Mountain, I will be doing a Battle of the Books bracket style competition of my honorable mentions. And then on Friday morning, I will have my best books of the year so we can end my end of year content with a happier note. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.